Jai Guru, everyone.
Tiger.
Jai Guru. Hello, welcome to Yogananda podcast. We're on now chapter 18, just starting, and we're with the usual crowd. How's Mike doing today?
I'm doing very well. We usually record this on a Friday, and Fridays somehow make me happy. For me, it's Friday morning.
And you, Lauren?
I'm doing good. The sun is shining over here in the UK. And
Yeah.
even though it's cold, it's bright and sunny. Mike even said to me, "Are you somewhere different, Lauren?" And I was like, "No, it's just the sunshine."
The British
So,
cliche of it making everyone happy is true
absolutely.
for us.
Yeah.
I was researching lots to do with vitamin D today, so
Mm.
Mm.
sunshine. But Chris, you don't suffer from lack of that, do you?
We definitely don't have that here in Brazil. It's peak summer heat. So I hear complaints now and again about the heat. So I shan't bore you with those complaints. I'm not
Very,
complaining personally. I love it.
very good.
Bring on the heat.
Very good. Okay, so chapter 18. It is entitled The Mohammedan Wonder Worker. Firstly, the title. If Guruji was writing this today, you probably wouldn't use this word. But I think back in those days, in India especially, probably in the US as well, Muslims were referred to as Mohammedans, just as Christians are referred to as Christians, Christians, and Buddhists as well. So, I suppose it's following the norm, but nowadays you'd use Muslims or Islamic, the Islamic wonder worker, perhaps. So yeah, there's that. But because I think a lot of there's some Muslims that have other prophets, so then this wouldn't cover all Muslims in this section. Yeah, so that's quite a cool observation because it's if you research a little bit more about Islam now, then you'd know there's other people that are also revered, especially in Sufi Islam as well. So yeah, that's nice. So the chapter is quite a intriguing chapter, potentially the most intriguing out of the lot. We were discussing this at the last after the close of our last episode about how which of the chapters you most go back to and which one do you least go back to, and this is not for me, it's not in the chapters of the autobiography that I most go go back and reflect on. I don't know, for listeners, maybe you want to weigh in, maybe you've got a different experience of it, but hopefully this deep dive review will make us appreciate it more than I have done in my life to date.
I always like this chapter because it's light and a bit of comedy, but yeah, I also didn't feel very much. I don't know. I couldn't identify much with the story. So I mean, I would love someone that I can call some astral being, and it does stuff for me. So it opens a whole door into a different world that I've never heard of before. So it's very interesting, but oh, hardly. I'm a bit like you there, Brian, where I don't feel like very attracted to this chapter when I open the book. There's other chapters that are more captivating.
Yeah, me neither. I'd almost forgotten about this chapter, to be honest. And when it came up for the next one, I was like, oh, yeah, that happened. But I do remember feeling quite uneasy when I first read it, and I still kind of get the same feeling of slight unease now. I think it's just that, you know, um, thing of not using your powers in that way, if you have any. And but I really like the chapter because I feel like it dispels that misconception that we might have that if we are spiritually advanced, then we have spiritual powers. And it's not necessarily the case. And I think this is a really nice example of that. And also that, anything that's given to us can be taken away in a moment's notice. So use it wisely.
True. So next time, Lauren, we're in central London, and I don't know if you've ever seen those people that are just street performers, and they're like floating on a carpet. They've got this like walking stick, but they seem like they're floating.
Yeah.
So Lauren, we can tell them, all powers, aren't necessarily good. So even though you may be floating, think twice, my friend. Think twice.
If they were actually floating, maybe.
We don't know. What are you saying, Lauren? Casting dispersion.
It's all a ruse.
The other thing in this chapter is really about the guru-disciple promise, and how unlimited it is, how eternal it is, and infinite forgiveness. I think we'll hopefully cover that a little bit more in this chapter. And also a very fascinating concept of astral beings used in this context, not one that we're exposed to anywhere else in the autobiography. You're exposed to it a little bit in other books, such as God Talks with Arjuna, where he kind of describes other beings, especially in the descriptions of the text. Mike?
And it reminded me more of a Brother Grimm's fairy tale. I did not expect that when I read the autobiography. I don't know if you guys felt the same, but I always thought there is probably an astral realm, but I didn't think, having an astral being that has to obey your command, it's quite a strong connection. I didn't think this was something that is easily happening, but apparently it is.
Apparently it is. Yeah, we'll talk hopefully more about that and understand them a bit more in this chapter as well, because we're forced to explore into a bit more detail, and also what free will these supposed beings that are almost like slaves in this context here. It opens up some hairy questions that hopefully we can do justice to. The other thing is important lesson from this chapter is about how easy it is to fall from grace, and also how easy it is to recover, which is what happens to our chief protagonist in this section. I don't think we're told his actual name, is it? Don't know. I'll come back to that.
Afzal Khan.
Is that Afzal? Is that
No,
his name?
Hazrat.
Okay, yeah.
Which one?
Hazrat.
Sorry.
Yeah, Hazrat is the astral being, and maybe this Muhammadan or Muslim is Afzal Khan, as Lauren says.
Afzal Khan, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh.
Yes, it is him. Yes. Both Muslim names, which is interesting, and we'll come to that. I think that's relevant. But yeah, let's start now, shall we? The first section is really an ode to synchronicity. So it starts with Sri Yukteswar speaking, saying, long time ago, in this very place, in this very room, a Muhammadan wonder worker performed 4 miracles before me. An absolutely wonderful start to a chapter, isn't it? But I was taken a bit aback by it, in that it's nice that Sri Yukteswar would go visit Mukunda's halls of residence, isn't it? It seems like it's like a nice little personal personal story that they've shared here, that they can, that Sri Yukteswar was intimately involved in all aspects of Mukunda's life, that he would go and check out his halls of residence.
Yeah.
I have to correct myself. I thought he was going to move into the hermitage when he moved to Serampore, but apparently not. Apparently he's more moving to a boarding house.
Is that what we discussed last time, is it?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that. Yeah.
Oh gosh, so we should correct all of us, because none of us corrected
you.
Yeah. So yeah, he says that in this very room that you occupy, and it's like a bit of a, is it coincidence?
No.
No, definitely not.
So it would appear that
Mm.
Sri Yukteswar had in mind not only that to move Mukunda into this hall of residence, rather than in Calcutta, but also to put him in this very room that he has got some history with. So he must have seen quite a few things when he decided to move Mukunda from Calcutta to Serampore, right? And so it's almost like he's seen, or he's almost influencing the fates to make this, and then so we can then Mukunda in the Paramahansa Yogananda in the future writes about it, and then the millions of people around the world that have read this book read about it, and then us talking about it. So it's all quite a long chain of fate-filled events. So that's quite cool. So Sri Yukteswar made this statement during his first visit. So it must have been many visits. Again, very sweet. Immediately after starting this college, he said he's taken a room in this boarding house called a Banti, and yeah, so it's just essentially halls of residence. I believe this room is still around, or the building is like in a bit of ruins, but I've seen images on Facebook where where this is the place where he stayed, and that must be the place where the 4 miracles also occurred. I remember when I was in India last year, my wife and I needed a place to stay, and there was no hotels, but there was a big university, and we convinced the the boarding house, the Banti, to let us use one of the rooms for the night. That was quite nice because it was holidays. So yeah. So and then and Guruji says, "Master, what a coincidence." So we talked about coincidence, and all of you shook your heads, right, about this coincidence. But Guruji's used the word coincidence. Yeah. Should he use the word coincidence? Is he just playing the role, for the reader to tell the narrative? Because it's obviously not a coincidence, because Sri Yukteswar, as we know, has orchestrated a lot of what is going on.
Exactly. I mean, it's also not a coincidence that there's suddenly a school in Serampore offering his course. I wonder what the reason is. If it's really, like you mentioned earlier, Priyank, he puts him in this room so he can tell the story, so he can write it in the book, or if there's more to it, if there is some spiritual vibration, maybe there is something when a yogi meditates in a place regularly, you create some kind of vibration that attracts other yogis. So maybe that was the reason. I don't speculation.
Very, very true. That's a very good point. I was just reading, my friend was giving me a book about Vastu and Feng Shui, about this very topic. And one of the things that it said on the negative side was that if someone's gone like insane, someone's lost their mind, if someone's committed suicide or something in the house or room that you're staying in, you should consider not staying in there, because it will carry those vibrations. And if you do want to stay there, you have to do these like kind of rituals to kind of purify the place. But then the inverse is also true, as Mike says. If Sri Yukteswar was there in the past, and Afzal, this Mohammedan, who obviously has some spirit, some spiritual powers, that was there, maybe it was beneficial as well for Mukunda in some way.
There's this Native American method of burning a dried sagebrush and going, because it creates a lot of smoke, and you go through the rooms, and it's supposed to clear the space of spirits that are dwelling in this area. So when I moved into my new place, that my sister came again with a sagebrush and cleared everything.
I've used that
traditional.
method as well.
Yeah.
Apparently, clapping in areas can help clear energy in rooms as well. One of our old friends from SRF who's passed told me methods of cleansing energy in rooms.
Yeah, ashrams in India use it as well. I don't know exactly which what incense they use, but they use this very strong smoky incense, and they just go around and they do it every day. So they'll go around every part of the premises, and
Mhm.
like and it will be one of the monks that does it. To walk around swinging, and temples in India do it as well. So it must be a thing that's ancient science that we don't know about. Or maybe some listeners know, but I'm not aware of it. I just see it being done. Right. So, and then he says, sorry, Chris.
Smells good.
Yeah. And Mukunda further plays the role. He says, "Really, are these walls decorated with ancient memories?" He asks, and he looked around the room with some newfound interest. And Sri Yukteswar smiled, and he said, "It's a very long story." And he kind of reminisces, so he may have had a little bit of a moment of silence to think about that. And the next section is really about, I think, is about a guru entering a devotee's life and reestablishing the eternal guru promise, disciple promise. And Sri Yukteswar says it. He says, the name of the fakir was Afzal Khan, and a fakir is described as a Muslim yogi. It's from the Arabic fakir, which is poor, originally applied to dervishes under a vow of poverty.
I was thinking about this being called a fakir and thinking about the chapter ahead and what he does, right? He uses his powers to kind of gain possessions and, such like that. And it made me think, okay, well, did he really accept his vow of poverty then? Could that be part of the reason that he performed all these miracles or actions, because perhaps he wasn't quite on board? I don't know. It might not be, but it was something that I thought about at least.
I love that he put this footnote there, because I didn't know the real meaning of fakir. The only places where I encountered fakir was in comedic ways in TV shows, or maybe in Asterix comics, where they were spitting fire or something like that. So I'm quite happy to learn. I mean, that there is a whole spiritual meaning to it.
Indeed. I always just thought, whenever I heard it, it was just an Islamic cleric, call him a fakir. Especially one that's like committed his whole life to essentially a renunciant to the path. So yeah. So Sri Yukteswar continues that he had extraordinary powers, and that he'd obtained them through a lucky meeting with a Hindu yogi.
It's quite interesting that these words chance encounter, because that implies that it's sort of like a coincidence, right? But can anything really be? Right. So I don't know. It's an interesting way to phrase it.
Yeah, it's leading us readers astray, because what we know from everything that's happened to now, i.e. Sri Yukteswar putting him here and all that stuff, and also what happens in the rest of the chapter, where it turns out that he was his guru in a past life, and he's come back. So it's not a chance encounter, is it? But Sri Yukteswar is also, it seems, playing the game and using the language that maybe Mukunda is not the only one in the room that he's telling the story to, and maybe that's why Mukunda is also using the word coincidence, and here Yukteswar is using chance encounter, just because everyone believes in, most people, average Joes, believe in luck, don't they? Whereas Einstein says God does not throw dice. As I'm sure would also subscribe to that saying. So the next section is where he says, the Hindu yogi says, "Son, I'm thirsty, fetch me some water." And it says a dust-covered sannyasi made this request of Afzal during his early life, when he was a child, a boy, in a small village of eastern Bengal. Would you fetch the water, Chris, if some dusty old man asked you such things? Fetch. It's not a bit offensive.
Probably been asked for worse things by worst in worse ways.
So if someone
Sure.
someone said
Sure.
fetch, boy, fetch, you wouldn't just walk away.
It is curious to me. I think like different languages will have different ways of requesting things. In English, I think if you said to somebody in English, "Hey, fetch me this," that would be an extremely disrespectful way to ask for something. However, my interpretation is putting this down to language, direct language translation, where it probably wouldn't be as disrespectful in the language that it was spoken at the time. But yeah, I mean, if somebody said that to me today, I think, Priyank, if you said it, you'd probably get the water thrown in your face. Yeah. You'd get a bath instead of a drink.
But if it's a sannyasi, there might be more of a readiness to help because you feel like you're doing it for someone who devoted his life to God. So I agree that not the most friendly way to ask for something, but I think if I would encounter someone who, I mean, that doesn't happen much in my life, to be honest, but if it did, like somebody who is a monk or an renunciant, then I think all of us would probably have a high readiness to help.
Later on, he says, "Go bring me water quickly." No, please, no, thank yous. And I remember, and Chris, you made a fair point about he wouldn't have been speaking English, so there's an English translation. But Guruji is translating into English, so he's well within his rights to if it was a polite request by the fakir, by this Hindu to the fakir, to Afzal, then he may have put it in that kind of tone, but he didn't. And the point I'm trying to make is I think it would have been in a rude way. It would have been in a direct, not considerate, not calm that you'd expect a sage or a yogi to be in, because it's not rudeness. Politeness and manners have got different meanings from different cultures, and in India, it's definitely an elder or someone of higher rank, whether that's in religious matters or in age or in company, even a senior one level higher in a company, or like customers and staff. It's just not it's not considered rude. You can say it in a very direct very direct way.
Yeah, I was going to make the comment there as well that he is like a servant in this sense. So unfortunately, it would be more common, right? To have that kind of word spoken. Would it be Priyank Muj Panila? Is that how it is said? Panila.
Oh, Pani
Muj
Lao.
Panila.
Yeah, nice. Where'd you get that from? Oh, you were learning it.
I can't
Googled
tell you.
it.
I've got
Googled it.
this astral being called AI.
Pani Lao. Pani Lao. It is, yeah.
Panila.
I'm sure Lauren can, that, don't you?
Bunny.
You
Yeah,
know
that's
that.
water, right?
Oh, well done. We're all learning.
Yeah.
Very good. So he says, then the boy responds, "Master, I'm a Mohammedan, a Muslim. How could you, a Hindu, accept a drink from my hands?" And this is a quite a sad state of affairs, isn't it? If you think about the social norms that are present for him to respond in this way, and I'm very sorry, but it also is true even today. This exists about the separation and how people don't want to interact with, especially certain branches of society, religious people, elderly people as well, where it's conservatives essentially, where they don't want to have that association with people of other faiths. And it's not just Hindus that are guilty of this. It's multiple faiths in India that have this kind of religious inharmony in this way.
there's generally a cultural aspect to it where maybe I'm being too general, but in the West, we have the idea you should never punch down, always punch up. So we kind of challenge authority and challenge those with power and things like that. Whereas I'm not sure it's quite that way in parts of, say, East, Asia, where you daren't say anything to your superiors, whereas I think it's a little bit different in the West. So surely for us, if you saw somebody saying that in public, they'd probably get checked, in the West for sure.
Yeah, but it's also a good point, because I think back in those days, talking about, over 100 years ago here, that 120, maybe 130 years ago, actually, this in England, this would have been a thing between the different classes of the ranks of society, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that India hasn't really, may have improved slightly, but it definitely is still there. Like recently, was it Air India had this thing about halal food in their planes, where what had happened was, purely out of economic considerations, they'd put the non-vegetarian option. All non-vegetarian options on Air India flights are halal, which halal is the Islamic method of slaughter of animals, where they also recite a prayer, and they that's how they slaughter the animal, where essentially their throat is cut and they hang
And
the
remove
animal.
all the blood.
Yeah, the blood is drained, and they think Muslims consider that to be the most most humane way to slaughter the animal. But obviously other people of other faiths, or of no faith, actually don't consider that as because they're very much alive, and other faiths like to essentially cut the head off, or sever the head, for example, so there's no feeling. Or in the West nowadays, we stun the animals, don't we? Or some of the animals, we stun them before we slaughter them. But so Hindus and Sikhs don't like halal meat, even though you could argue shouldn't be eating meat. And actually, in Air India flights, 50% of the people actually opt for the vegetarian meal. So it's like 50%, probably over 50% actually have the vegetarian meals. But they didn't want, for the Hindus that were non-vegetarian, they don't want to have halal food. So now they've had this thing because of this, uprising of this kind of mentality. They don't want to, by default, have the Islamic option, if you know what I mean. And the culture is very much there, like in India, where so that's actually that's a social thing that you could, but it made the headlines, like it's a big thing. And but underlying all this, for example, here you didn't want to be served, but in India you have vegetarian restaurants and non-vegetarian restaurants, and you don't want utensils to touch, utensils that's been used for non-vegetarian food. You don't want to eat out of that, even if it's been washed. And this extends to all the way to, like, in rural India, you don't want to eat food at a household where that non-vegetarian food is being served. So it's in quite a few layers of society amongst the conservatives in India, and most of India are quite conservative in their religious and social outlooks. So it's still there, and it's mainstream. It makes news everywhere, like the Air India story that I just encountered. But we have some light at the end of the tunnel here, even 100 however many years ago this was, because when Afzal says, "How could you, a Hindu, accept a drink from my hands?" the Hindu yogi says, "Your truthfulness pleases me, my child. I do not observe ostracizing rules of ungodly sectarianism." Which is so for God-realized men, it makes no difference if his hands weren't as clean as you might imagine, or like if he'd recently slaughtered an animal, or all these things that traditional Hindus don't want to be served by Muslims. This doesn't apply to men of God realization. And then he continues, "So go bring me some water quickly." And we discussed about the culture and the etiquette in terms of the direct approach of language and making requests. And that's another example there. So, and it says, Mike?
Yeah, you could say even the Indian society has come a long way from that encounter to the Air India problem. It has become much more subtle, I'm guessing. And see, because I find oftentimes people complain that problems never go away, but they don't acknowledge that things get better, right? And I think they slowly do everywhere.
True. So it says, Afzal's reverent obedience, this is quite nice, was awarded a loving glance from the Yogi. It's a very heartwarming line, isn't it? Especially if you consider it in the context of, the whole book. If this was a regular novel, you wouldn't think anything of it. But the whole book is about their disciple-guru relationship. And in this chapter, we know that he is his guru. So this is like a very, very sweet moment, actually.
Isn't that like almost like a comedy, the way life planned this one out, where you meet your guru again in the next life, but you are Mohammedan and he's Hindu. So there's like this barrier built between you that you have to bridge first.
And I suppose that probably was a test for Afzal, right? Because Afzal may not have wanted to hear what a Hindu yogi says, because hey, he's a Muslim, right? Many Muslims don't want to hear or hear preaching from another faith. And because later on he actually tells him, your past life has this and that, you've got some seeds of bad karma from a past life. But Muslims don't believe in reincarnation, so he could have just turned around and say, well, on your own, see you later, I don't, this is not part of my faith. But he's obviously quite liberal, and he's quite open. He's not just a blind faith kind of person. So it's quite nice that that point is made, actually, in the fact that he was born a Muslim, because it would have been the story would have been much easier for him if he was also born a Hindu and of the same clan, and if that was his family's Pandit, it would have been a very smooth sailing. But that would have been a test for him, no doubt, for him to go beyond the boundaries of his faith. So yeah, very, very good point. Well made, Mike. So the loving glance from the yogi, and then he says, you possess the good karma of former lives. Yeah, as I just mentioned. It's not we don't hear Afzal's response, but in one of the multiverses, he would have said, what the hell are you talking about? There is only one life. On your own. Sling your rook. Give me that water back.
Yeah.
But in this universe, he kind of goes with it.
Yeah.
Doesn't say yes, doesn't say no. He just carries on. So he's a devotee. So he's of a higher mindset than one of simple sectarianism. So the next section is really an initiation, Diksha as we call it, I think, because he says, the sage says that I'm going to teach you a certain yoga method. Whatever could that be? Could it have been Hong So? Could it have been Om technique? Energization? Do you think? Like an advanced energization? Like, did you think it made him go straight to the Mahamudra Kriya without Kriya proper? We don't know. We don't know. And he says that this yoga method will give you command over the invisible realms. How absolutely fascinating, isn't it? And it's a very strange initiation, because we weren't, in our initiations, we weren't told that we'd start having power over invisible realms. It was much more subtle than that. And it's interesting that he's already told him that, his former lives thing, but it's interesting that he needs to be given this particular boon of being able to control the invisible realms. It's you wonder what he needed to overcome to be given that boon.
Yeah, it's interesting to me for what Mike was saying, what you guys were talking about there, which was the coincidental nature of everything that's happening and what's about to unfold after he sort of misuses the power, and like from his birth, into being Muslim and so on. It's like tailor-made for him to have the challenge and overcome the challenge, which is not to misuse the power. And he's got certain weaknesses that he's trying to overcome and become stronger. So this is maybe just exactly what he needs to be able to grow, given to him by his guru.
Yeah, so you do wonder what he needed to overcome. I think, do you think it could have been that he was addicted to greed in a past life? So now he has to overcome like having access to as much as he wants, but he has to like rein it in. Because it's a very strange thing, isn't it, to be given this particular boon to overcome your limitations. I wonder what limitation he had.
I think it's the latter that you just mentioned. I think sometimes life circumstances make it very easy for you to be a good person, because maybe you're surrounded by good people, or maybe you don't have that much power that you can abuse. So I think he had to make that experience of having a lot of
Very.
Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, he said, with great power comes great responsibility. So you have to do that test, and then if you fail, there will be karma, or if you pass, it will be karma, I guess. Yeah.
So, very good. Is that wisdom from Marvel?
That's right, from the Marvel universe.
We should write a book, Marvel Wisdom. But no, that's an exceptionally good point, I think, because often, just as you said, like life throws spanners in our work, so we get challenges. Like, if everything's going plain sailingly in your life, you wouldn't know you've got anger problems, for example, if everything's going your way. But then God and gurus put things in the way to make you angry, to make you realize you've got an anger problem that you need to resolve. And greed is obviously another one of these things. And that could potentially be the reason why some people are born with insane levels of wealth, because they couldn't overcome that wealth, when others seemingly have none, and then they've got to overcome the limitation of not having much. So it's swings and roundabouts in our many thousands of Marvel lives that we have to lead. The great powers that will be yours should be exercised for worthy ends. So worthy ends being, what do you think, charity?
Yeah, I would have thought, especially in that time, there might have been people who didn't have enough. I would have thought with this setup, he would go on and become the greatest philanthropist India has ever seen. But it wasn't like that. So it's a bit surprising, because I thought with that setup and his attitude, he had good attitude when he met sannyasi. So I thought this would go well.
Because it's not part of the divine schema, is it? For even if like there is like a Christ reborn now, and he had the power to make infinite bread and infinite wine, he wouldn't just solve the world's hunger crisis, would he? That's not what the plan is for this creation, is it? So I think what I'm trying to say is, I think this whole incident and this boon was given knowing that it wasn't going to work out this way, that i.e. all the hungry people of India are not going to suddenly be fed. They're not suddenly going to get lovely houses and utensils and all that stuff that they need to overcome poverty and hunger. But Yeah, let's follow the story. It says, never employ them selfishly, which is, of course, what ends up happening. Spoiler alert. And then he says, I perceive, alas, that you have bought some past, seeds of destructive tendencies. So again, second reference to his past lives here by this guru, by the guru. The first time he didn't respond to it, and I don't think the second time he'd be forgiven for being intrigued, because first time I think as a devotee it's good that he didn't, but second time he's been told that he's going to get something great. So at that point, even if you didn't believe what this guy was about to tell you, you'd still see what it comes to. But yeah, but he we shouldn't question his motives. He didn't react the first time, so maybe he wasn't going to react the second time either. He says essentially, don't allow them to sprout by watering them with evil actions, i.e. these tendencies that you have, prarabdha, maybe karma. It's so deep, isn't it? Don't allow them to sprout by watering them with fresh evil action.
It's that. I mean, it's also what Guruji says in other places, but it's a bit counterintuitive in the beginning, because sometimes you feel like I need to give some of the tendencies some room to get rid of that desire, but it's the opposite happens. The more air you give them, the more they flower. Right.
True. Like, if you stop charging your Tesla, how soon would it run out of juice?
Pretty soon.
All we got to do. All
and
we
then
got to do.
Then we'll catch fire and set my building on fire. Everything will end up in flames. We don't want that.
You can't allow it to go to 0%, is it?
If it goes to 0, you need someone from Tesla to come to start it again, or it's quite difficult. Yeah.
The reason I use this
happen.
analogy is because we keep adding to our karma, right? Fresh desires, fresh things, and then we keep, even if like we diligently do our kriyas and we burn away our karma very rapidly, lifetimes. If we keep adding stuff, then it's no good, right? But it's interesting that even if we do burn all of our karma, at the end we still have to go to the astral and the causal, similar to Mike's poor Tesla. The guy's got to come and give it a new lease.
Well, they shot one into space, right? I think there's one somewhere.
Yeah. So, but he now explains why this is happening here. He says the complexity of your previous karma is such that you must use this life to reconcile your yogic accomplishments with the highest humanitarian goals. I think this is confirmation of our theory here. He has to reestablish himself with humanitarianism. The highest as well, not just small time, not just like giving a few pounds to charity every month. The highest.
It also seems to suggest that it's such an intricate setup that they have currently that it's not just going to repeat in the next life to help him overcome. He's got this opportunity now, and it might be many lifetimes before he gets the opportunity again to overcome. That's what it sort of suggests to me, that you kind of have to use the time wisely and the opportunity wisely.
True. This encounter with this yogi for this man is obviously going to impact his fate. And according to the Divine Romance, there's a reading on what is fate. And it describes 3 ways to deal with the effects of actions. And it says that you can change it if you know the way. However, it's not easy. Guruji describes you can minimize the effect of the action, you can resist the effect, or you can completely stop it. And let's read about how you do that. Chris, do you want to start?
Why do people go to doctors? Because that is one way to minimize the effects of wrong actions. The physical way to lessen an illness or overcome it may be found in such remedies as proper diet, exercise, or medication. One self-realization student was recently healed of ulcers by a diet of bread and milk. But lessening or removing effects may not necessarily eliminate the cause. Under favorable circumstances, the cause may send forth new effects in the same or a different form.
Diet of bread and milk doesn't sound too bad to me. I could do that.
You have ulcers, Mike. Otherwise,
Maybe I shouldn't. To resist the effects of karma is to use common sense remedies, but rely more on the power of the mind. Refuse to accept any limiting condition. Affirm and believe in health, strength, success, even in the face of contradictory evidence. The effects of your actions have much less power to hurt you when you do not allow the mind to give in to them. Remember that. You can also resist by counteracting the bad effects of past wrong actions with good effects set in motion by present right actions, thus preventing the creation of an environment favorable to the fruition of your bad karma.
But how are you going to completely break the hold that fate has on you? The only way that you can permanently stop the undesirable effects of past wrong actions is by removing the cause of those effects. Harmful past life seed tendencies must be cauterized from the brain. Then there will be no recurrence of any type of illness or other troubles arising from them. Roast them in the fire of wisdom. Man suffers because of his errors, and the root cause of error is ignorance. Therefore, seek the wisdom born of meditation, which removes forever from within you the darkness of ignorance. Krishna said, O Arjuna, as enkindled flame converts firewood into ashes, so does the fire of wisdom consume to ashes all karma. When you meditate deeply, God's light of divine wisdom cauterizes the seeds of undesirable karma stored in the deep recesses of consciousness in the brain.
See, Guruji explains how to change our fate. And that's a very long chapter, so I encourage you to read it. It gets deeper and deeper. So this boy has now been taught this complicated technique. I just wonder what it was. I would like this control. The master vanished, apparently. And we don't know if he vanished by leaving the room or disapparated, as they do in Harry Potter. We don't know. What do you think, people? Do you think for the narrative, do you think he disappeared or just walked away?
I imagine him to just sort of goodbye. He's gone.
Yeah.
could he have mastery of the siddhas and went really small? He was actually there. He was actually there, but he was just super small.
Or he just kept sitting there and Afzal walked away. Yeah.
It's what I was gonna say was, if little Afzal had seen a Hindu yogi disappear, then his faith would be made so strong that it would be unshakable. He shouldn't have erred or fallen from this point, such a divine point in his life. But then he does get other miracles, i.e. control over things. But so I'm going to say that he walked away, vanished from his life, essentially, because I've got a theory on Hazrat, which we're going to get to in a minute.
I would say you're probably correct if you were how would you say, if he put himself in your shoes from that perspective, because you're a different individual to him. So, but he might have processed the vanishing of a being in front of him in a very different way to how you would process that. And that might have encouraged him to actually potentially do what he did. You know, maybe it might have been a inspiration in it to his weaker senses. Does that make sense? So he might have then went and wanted to show off or do something. You know, maybe he might have processed that in a very different way as well. So
So
I would.
do you think that he had strong faith at this point or not?
Undecided.
I'm going to say not. And I think if he had shown the miracle of vanishing, then he would have had it increased. But I think he still retained his weaknesses, shall we say. But I'm going to explain why I've got that theory in a minute. Mike?
I think he actually starts to practice this technique. So I think this sannyasi must have left quite the impression on him, and it was a life-changing
20
moment.
years.
But yeah, but we also might underestimate the effect that just life and time passing has on you if you're not in the right circles, maybe.
So do you think he was able to, we got to work this out, I think, as we read it. Did he have his powers? Did he have his powers straight away, or did it come over time through the practice? I think we've got to watch out for when it comes. So it says he practiced this exercise for 20 years. This is Sri Yukteswar speaking, and his miraculous feats began to attract widespread attention. And it seems that he was always accompanied by a disembodied spirit, who he called Hazrat. So, do you think it was instant over time or at the end of 20 years?
I don't think it was instant, and he didn't mention Hazrat, the yogi that he mentioned. So he must have met Hazrat during his long practices of the technique, I suppose.
He said, "Command. I'm going to give you a command over one of the invisible realms." Is what he had promised him.
Right. Okay.
Which doesn't mean that you're going to get Hazrat. It just means that you can, fire out of your hands or some insane thing like that. What do you think, Chris?
It does seem to imply that he does get it pretty much immediately, because it does warn him at the very beginning, like the great powers should be exercised to worthy end. So which great powers?
True.
It has to be Hazrat in this sense, because that's what he ends up misusing, right? So yeah, it's open to interpretation, but I would imagine he kind of gets it pretty quickly.
So basically, what you're then saying is, if you get given this technique, one practice or 1 second's practice of this technique would give you this strength straight away. It's like an equation. You do this to this, and then you get this Hazrat.
It's unknown because we don't know his previous lives. We do know that he had great, good karma before.
True.
So what that allowed him, the starting point at which that allowed him, we don't know.
True. Mike?
He might have seen in him the discipline and the ability to get there pretty quickly. I don't know why he would mention the 20 years if it didn't take him a while at least to do the technique, right? Yeah.
I think the 20 years is the length of time that he called on Hazrat to do his bidding. And then at the end of the 20 years, his guru comes back, and then they live happily ever after, as we're going to get to. Whether or not he gets the powers straight away, or after a few weeks or months or years, we don't know. But Chris, what were you going to say?
Yeah, the miraculous feats began to attract widespread attention. I'd say that would be pretty quick back in the day if you were able to manifest. And so maybe it does hint to say, like, it was later on that the attraction came. Would it really have taken 20 years for word to spread, as wildly as maybe is it suggested here? Maybe not, because 100 years ago we didn't have telephones and so on. But I would say pretty much every single person would be talking about this person, you know, in the villages and so on, if they saw him manifesting, you know, the various things. So yeah, maybe it did take him a while.
Bit like the Tiger Swami.
Yeah.
I do think performing this technique was more than just calling on Hasrats. That performing the technique was probably also part of it, was maybe purifying or improving his spiritual state.
I think the technique was entrance into an astral realm, because we know from later on that Hazrat is a astral being. It's explained, right? And in Islam, there's a belief, the belief of astral beings exists, and they're called jinns. Jinns are like these
Are they
mystic
usually in lamps?
jinn, as in
And
J.
you rub
It
the
probably
lamp,
it probably
Yeah,
derives
like-
from that.
like
So
a genie.
jinn,
Yeah.
Ginn is the Arabic jinn, Jinn. That's probably where genies derives from. So it's like it's part of their belief. It's like they do the bidding. They're like the inverse of an angel. Angels just do God's bidding, but jinns have got this kind of free will, and they've got this. They can basically perform magic, and it's a being that you can call upon, but they're not. It's not. What's it called? It's not considered a good thing to use jinns.
It's not a good omen
in Islam. Not it's not about omen. It's about, I think, misusing God's powers. And whenever I spoke to Muslims about this, which was in university, but yeah, Mike.
I was reminded, because we mentioned Harry Potter earlier, as remember Dobby the house elf?
Yeah.
It was like a similar character, and then I think to get to lose the will of a house elf is when you make them a present, right? So there's something you can do to lose them as well.
in as much as it wouldn't necessarily be good then, Priyank, for spirits that have bodies, i.e., you know, people on Earth here in the physical realm, to misuse a higher realm's ability in this grosser existence. Would it then still be bad for Hazarat, for the disembodied spirit in the higher realm, to interfere, let's say, in this sort of physical world as well? So there might have then been this joint karma of negative karma being created.
Perhaps we don't know. Maybe we need to find out more about jinns
Or their
in the coming episodes, if they are if he is indeed a jinn according to Islam. But this is, I think this goes back to my question about how much faith do you think he had in this guru? Because I think what has happened is that he's got his set of beliefs, Islamic beliefs, Afzal, and what has happened is that this Hindu yogi, who's a mystic, he's just given him access to part of their faith that is something already in their faith and religion, i.e., access to jinns. And then he could have gone and used his powers to call on jinn and then do things that are not necessarily good. But if he had really had a lot of faith in his guru from the very beginning, I think it would have been a transforming moment in his life, rather than just a moment where he can start using mystical powers. So I think he started off pretty weak, other than his ability to practice their technique, and then he got worse and worse. shall we say? Because if it started off that badly, then the guru wouldn't have given him this power straight away, would he? He would have transformed him a little bit at least, because obviously he's going to use his powers for evil. But yeah, and I think the other thing that we've got to acknowledge is that, you know, the Bible quote that's often quoted, and it's at the start of some of the autobiographies, is except ye see signs and wonders ye will not believe, John 4:48. So now there's many people that are going to see many, many signs and wonders. And although these signs and wonders are in the Islamic faith, they're certainly not, they wouldn't have been in the Hindu faith in terms of calling astral beings to do your bidding in this world. That's much more like God and gurus coming and grace. It's not as sinister as astral being that's your slave and doing anything that you want, because a guru or an angel wouldn't do things that would cause harm. Whereas in this case, Afzal is stealing things and things like that, right? So it's a very nuanced scenario here, depending on who the audience is of these signs and wonders. So I'm excited to explore this further, shall we say? But yeah, that's the end of this section. Lauren, what is coming up?
Well, in the next section, we're going to see just how Afzal uses or misuses his powers and the quite negative effects that it has on people around him. And we also get an insight into Sri Yukteswar's meeting with him and what happened with that. So yeah, it's a nice part of the chapter where we really get to know Afzal Khan.
Excellent. And were you excited to have known him further? Was your life better for it?
Well, I think, every example of someone's life enriches ours if we choose it to, right? We can learn from it. We don't have to necessarily agree with what he does or seek to do the same, but we can use it as a great example of what not to do.
Very well said.
Yeah.
Very well said. Yeah, I wouldn't mind having some of his powers, though, I must say.
Yeah,
Would
on
you
that
use it for
note,
good? Sorry.
yeah, I was going to say something similar, like maybe simply reading this story, it's like a humbling experience, is to just to think like, how would you actually do? How would we do in these situations? So it's really useful to go over these stories. Yeah.
What would you do? Oof, it's tough, isn't it?
What would you do?
I mean, you can have a Lamborghini for the day and just give it back. Can you
Yeah.
imagine how
But
cool that
then
would be?
what's the good purpose of that? What's the worthy end? Right? In some ways, it's a blessing that we don't have powers because maybe we're not ready, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's easy
Yeah.
to read it and,
Go,
there's a
"Oh,
little bit
yeah."
of staving off of judgment, like, oh, this bad guy, like, look, he misused these powers. But,
But
it's
like,
challenge.
yeah, it's challenging. And like Mike was saying earlier, life goes on and you don't know what's going to affect you and you don't know what tendencies you're going to fall back into. And it's, yeah, like you say, Chris, it's quite easy to get into a bit of a judgment seat and go, oh, yeah, well, he's not doing the right thing. But actually, if he had those tendencies, it's quite hard to overcome.
I think from up to now, I'm going to stick with my initial position where I don't think he had that much faith at the very beginning. Because if this happened to most people here, I think the same thing that would happen to Afzal would happen to 99% of the population. But say it happened in your life where like you were exceptionally rooted in your faith, then this would just be like the icing on the cake, wouldn't it? Your whole life would just be dedicated to this very simple instruction that your guru's given for humanitarian aims. But I don't think Afzal was there yet.
I think we have in the previous episode evidence contrary to that, in as much as the story that we read with the boy who was given advice over and over and over again, the boy who lived, by Sri Yukteswar.
He actually was the boy who lived.
He literally was the boy who lived. Shashi. And Shashi basically said through his faith did he say he would simply kind of continue his wicked ways because he knew that he would be saved and healed. And this is kind of what's happening in this story that's unraveling. So faith is like a double.
It's the previous incarnation of Shashi.
faith isn't just one way, essentially, for, you can hurt yourself still with the misuse of the intellect woven into the faith. Does that make sense?
Mm,
The ego woven into it.
yeah.
Ooh, this is an interesting hypothesis there. Maybe
Yeah.
Shashi was Afzal. Afzal
Maybe.
was Shashi. Afzal and then Shashi.
Reincarnated
know.
upon the
We don't know.
reincarnations.
We don't know.
But the thing that happened to both of them at the end was what? The guru
They-
came and saved
Yeah,
them.
and the same. It's kind of like the same.
Mm,
So it's kind of beautiful
Yeah.
in a way. It reminds me of like no matter what happens, the guru will come, but then we choose what to do with it, right? Like Shashi just turned away,
mm.
and Afzal chose to go ahead and follow the path to the
Yeah.
end.
In a sense, we kind of do this thing by principle, by not heeding the guru's advice to one degree or another.
Yeah.
We're kind of guilty, but this is to a pretty big degree, and a big challenge and a big obstacle. But at the principle level, the guru is there, even though we err many ways.
If you listen to those stories in isolation, you might think, oh, what a failure. But it was probably just the right thing to happen in their spiritual progress. And they had to learn this lesson, and this was the way to do it. And to be fair, it's a pretty spectacular way to learn things, I would say, for Afzal. And for the Tiger Swami, and also for maybe for Sashi a bit less, but also pretty interesting. You got to meet Yukteswar. That's pretty great.
Mhm.
This is the longest looking ahead section we've ever done. I think. That's how intriguing this chapter is.
It is intriguing, isn't it? Yeah.
Lauren's got her work cut out for the next episode.
Oh,
Miracle
yeah.
after miracle after miracle.
Yeah.
Shall see you next time.
Yes,
Thank you very
see
much,
you
everyone.
all.
Okay.
Jai Guru.